Okay, so obviously our topic of discussion are ICOs dead, and it says here long live STOs or what, question mark, which we are here to discuss. So as mentioned, I'm the CEO of CoinRivet, not Rivit, Rivet. So we're a UK publication focusing purely on blockchain and crypto space. Laura here runs her own PR company focusing on ICOs and has raised through her comms and PR work nearly $200 million for her various ICO clients. And Jan here has previously consulted for some of the large banks and VC funds and is currently working on in a startup focusing on protocol for digital funds. So we'll start the questioning off really focusing on, I suppose, ICOs, are they dead? Laura, I'm going to start with you. What's your opinion? Obviously 2017, plethora of ICOs, 2018. So how hard has that made your job? What's your opinion on where the current view of ICOs are?
So basically, I came on the ICO industry 3 years ago when no one even knew what ICOs are. We would say it's alternative way to fundraise money through issuing virtual tokens, and everyone was like, how does it work? What it is. Whereas here, 3 years later, we see a trend that not only everyone is already know what ICOs are, but they are already tired a bit of this alternative way to fundraise because of the following reasons, such as there were a lot of scams, there were a lot of very easy money grabs, and people are in the need of something more stable and more secure which we can trust, rather than, you know, having a white paper, a website and a wallet and you're fundraising tens of millions of dollars. So answering your question, I would say that these days, as a way, blockchain or tokens or cryptos are still there, they're still a hot topic, but people want more security. That's where security tokens come on board.
Okay, fantastic. And Jan, your opinion just generally in terms of security tokens, how they're evolving, the general makeup of them, and we can potentially touch on regulation in a moment, but just the overview of STOs in the current state.
Sure, yeah. So I do think it makes sense to look at this from, you know, the perspective of what happened in the 2017 ICO boom or craze rather.
Yeah.
So I think ICOs are dead. I would agree with that statement in the sense that large crowd sales to the public that are unregulated, that's probably not going to continue to that extent. So really, the most generic way of understanding STOs then is as a departure from that, and by saying, well, we are actually issuing a security and we're going to try to comply with these securities laws in various countries. But then that's still a pretty big basket of possible configurations. You could have a security token that literally behaves like a share, so including dividend payments and decision-making rights and so on. Or you could have only parts of it, right? Or you could have something that works differently, but is still considered a security. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So obviously Jan's mentioned there he thinks ICOs are dead. Coming back to you, obviously your role very much is alive. You're out there raising funds via ICOs. How hard has it been generally from the, I suppose, backlash of 2017 for your clients to go out there with a genuine offering, a solid product, they want to take to market, they want to raise capital? How are they best to do that given everything in the last 12, 18 months?
Very good question. So basically, first, when all the ICOs were fundraising money, they just needed to have a couple $100 grand for the budget to buy Facebook ads, to buy Google ads when they weren't still banned, then buy some banners and some PR, and you can expect a pretty decent fundraising campaign, whereas now, everyone already invested. All those entrepreneurs, all those tech people who most probably bought Bitcoin at very low price, and they didn't really understand the value psychologically of what they have. They already played their part, they were invested, most of them lost their money, unfortunately. So now you can't really just say we're going to be the best company, we're going to be the first one in the crypto industry. You actually have to show your value proposition. You have to actually show an MVP, some kind of product which you already developed before the ICO. So what I notice right now from my clients, it's not only about buying the ads or buying all the, you know, trackers, which everything basically, if you have one, you can buy anything these days, especially in crypto. It's more about actually showing what is your value. And most of the investors who are right now into the ICOs or soon to be STOs are not some entrepreneurs, retail investors. They're actually high-net-worth individual fund owners, VCs, who could be even sometimes an accredited investor. So the investor market is changing a lot, and the communication should be adapted accordingly. First white papers, which I helped to write for my clients, were basically a marketing pitch. We didn't even have a lot of numbers there. We just have some big slogans, some big names, maybe team members, whereas now you actually have to show the business plan. You have to show what is your potential revenue model, these things, and it basically changed for the last 6-9 months or so.
Okay, so again, from your viewpoint, running your own agency, how do you decide what actually looks like a good ICO, what is not scammy, or the white paper, and we've seen so many people headed up by somebody from Microsoft, and they used to work in the admin department. When you do a bit of research, how are you making sure that the information you're giving out to the general public, because I see your job as being that kind of backstop of making sure that actually this is a valid ICO you believe in as much as obviously the owners believe in as well? How do you make sure that you're doing that research as well?
I would say you can never be sure. Doesn't matter if you're working with ICOs or you're working with any regular tech company. You can never be sure if the founders have good intentions. So I try to really connect with the people behind the product, behind the idea, to see what are their values and if those values kind of correlate with me. But in then I really try to communicate even to potential investors that this is still a very risky investment. Before doing ICOs, I was working with startups and tech companies, so we all know the slogan, 99% of startups fail. So ICOs are basically the same startups, just with a blockchain on top of it, and basically just have better marketing and PR. So you can never be sure. You have to kind of hope for the best and really align your values together.
But do you find it harder and harder to get that message across in terms of going back to the question, are ICOs coming close to their death, or are we seeing the real stragglers 2018 and 2019? It's going to be really shifting towards the STO side of things.
I would say either you're doing an ICO or STO, it's more about the token, about the regulation compliance. Still, the business model should more or less be the same. The business idea should be more or less the same.
Yeah, my point is, are people going to start thinking, I'm not calling it an ICO, but I'm going to call it an STO. It is security, I know it's the security. It probably hand on heart is the security, but I'm trying to call it an ICO. Are we seeing that shift amongst the ICO community, do you feel? And going back to sort of trying to answer the questions somewhat.
What I noticed from a lot of ICOs who approach me, they're deciding to do STO just because they're hoping that one more craze will gonna start, as everyone was investing in ICO 3 years ago just because it was an ICO, it was a sexy thing. Now we're like, okay, so we're just gonna invest somewhere like $250,000, we're gonna have the money, but then we're gonna have 10, 20, or even 50x return of the investment. So I would think half, if not more, STOs are doing it just because they know the STO will bring money rather than they would actually need a security token.
So Jan, following on from that, does that just mean that ICOs are changing their name and just becoming an STO, and actually we feel slightly more comfortable because there's a bit of regulation wrapped around that? Various different countries have obviously their own regulation, but we all know the SEC defines the regulation quite clearly for what a security token is. Does that just mean we are shifting the swathe of 2017 ICOs and just repackaging them and calling them STOs for 2019?
Well, to some degree, I would agree with that. And of course, you know, like some part of it is just like jumping from one buzzword to another. And you know, it's hard, it's important not to get hung up by semantics too much here. But I do also think that it's, to some degree, a sign of the maturity and the professionalization of the space. Yeah. Because for most types of businesses, an investment vehicle that, you know, has a certain promises of future revenue, you know, like whether that's dividends or some other cash flows, is going to be adequate for most types of businesses. And before STOs, a lot of these businesses tried to kind of force tokenize their business model and came up with a useless utility token. And so a lot of these businesses now are saying, okay, let's just have a normal business model instead of some elaborate tokenized ecosystem and promise our investors some of the profits we're making. And I do think that's going to be the adequate solution for the bulk of projects. But then I also think that the real, the Facebooks and the Googles of Web3, I do think that those are going to be utility token models. Yeah. It's just for the bulk of projects, a security token is going to be adequate. And we're seeing that shift definitely. Yeah.
But does that mean there are going to be, therefore, by definition, less ICOs of old moving into the STO space because it's going to be hard because of the regulation in each of those countries? Is that just, so therefore what we are left with are going to be the better products to take to markets where people really do see the value in terms of providing a global economy some value out of that security token?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'd say there's several kind of trends and factors that play into this. So one obviously is this increased scrutiny from regulators and increased awareness of securities law and such. Yeah. But then also, like I said, and I'm sure not sure if you can confirm that, but from an investor's perspective, it's way easier to value an asset if it will pay you some money in the future. It's like textbook finance, you can discount the cash flows on it. Whereas if it's a utility token that functions in a weird way, it's really non-trivial to have any idea of what that thing is supposed to be worth. Yeah. So I think that's another important factor. It's just it's something people are used to, and yeah, will be adequate for most cases, I think.
But what I can add, and what we all need to be aware of, some of the companies who are saying they're going to do a security token, they're just communicating that rather than actually going through a compliance process. I want to ask all of you to think of all the companies that are doing an STOs. Are they actually fully regulated already, or are they just saying we're gonna do a security token after, let's say, we're gonna fundraise money, after we're gonna do something? So sometimes STO is still a marketing PR word rather than actually going through it. Mm-hmm. And that's what we really need to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so in terms of, do you see a shift in communications to, let's call it the general public, because obviously those are the people we're trying to get the investments from. Do you see a shift in your ability to communicate the difference between the ICO and the STO? And do people feel more comfortable because it's an STO, because it feels like it's got regulation behind it? Do people understand that what you've just said, we're going to do an STO, but we're not doing it right now, we're probably still an ICO, and in the future we'll do an STO because I'm sure the SEC might come after us, and actually at that point we'll start complying. I mean, that's really, how do I understand that as an average person wanting to invest in a project? How do I even get my head around that? How do you communicate that to people?
Well, what problem I'm personally facing right now, and other people who are doing marketing and PR for the STOs, that we don't really know exactly what can we communicate or not. Yes, there are some degree, there are already some laws, but the problem is, are we actually communicating a product or a company which is like, let's say, a hedge fund where you need to have an accredited investor, or we're just kind of saying this is security, this is fully regulated, and we can promise huge returns. We're still not 100% sure what can we say. That's why, for example, I personally, when I'm working with STO clients, which are just right now in launch, I'm being very cautious about what we can say before I have a lawyer's approval on anything. Because most probably, what we're gonna have, I know, which strategy we're gonna craft today, it might have to be changed completely within, I know, a few weeks or a few months.
Okay, okay. So just going back to, I suppose, thinking about how ICOs are evolving, are we saying that all ICOs currently will have to become STOs? Is that going to have to happen? Do we see that happening in the future? Is it a case that at some point everybody's going to think after the 1st of March, whatever date, we can't actually do because it's been governed that we can't have an ICO anymore?
Yeah, so I wouldn't expect all token sales to become security token offerings, but the bulk. I would, as I kind of touched on before, I think it's adequate for the vast majority of projects, but I still think there is fundamental innovation in having utility tokens, but not just. It depends really what does the token actually do and how does it produce value in that specific ecosystem. So I think we've seen a switch away from just pure access and payment utility tokens, more towards structures that encourage incentives to hold through something, through either staking or maybe the tokens have a governance function as well, or a work function to really kind of incentivize a distributed set of actors to engage in economic activity for a network without having a corporate structure and a kind of command and control. Now you do this, you do that, but just a bunch of rules that incentivize these people to kind of self-organize. And I do think there's tremendous innovation in these concepts. We just haven't quite figured it out yet. I'd say the only really point in case where that worked was Bitcoin. And yeah, arguably Ethereum, but that's about it. And yeah, we'll have to see which models will prevail. And
yeah. Okay, so thinking about, I suppose, we've probably all got a very clear idea about ICOs and maybe the pros and the cons for those. Do we have a very clear idea of what the positives are? Let's start with those for STOs in the market, where we stand at this point. Do we have a clear idea of what the benefits could be?
Yeah, to me, the main benefit is clarity, both in terms of what investors can expect, and then also from a regulatory standpoint, just being relatively confident you're not going to get sued. So that would be my take.
Okay, and what do we think about improving traditional finance models then, from an STO perspective?
So, I mean, personally, I think the major innovation here is in terms of standardization, right? So what makes me excited about STOs is the prospect of truly global standardized capital markets that are more accessible, but still then obviously subject to local regulations. So that really is a challenge, but I think that's really the main benefit. Otherwise, it is really just a digital share.
But would STOs not mean a higher number of global investors, which makes the message slightly harder? But surely, general methods of investment, very localized, probably not the same language barriers, those kinds of things. We've suddenly got anybody who's got access to the internet, let's say, and depending on which country they're in, and we know each country has its own set of rules and regulations around these things. But doesn't an STO, I understand ICO does, but we've seen a decline in those and a rise in STOs. How do you then communicate to a higher number of investors on a global scale? How do you communicate that message to them in terms of why they should invest in STOs?
So basically, as I mentioned before, a few years ago, you just needed to have banners, you need to have some ads, and that worked out perfectly. Now you really need to communicate the value, the revenue model, the business model, and you need to go through personal connections, through conferences, through meetups, maybe hire someone to do fundraising for you who already have the contacts, rather than putting, I know, the bounty campaign, doing the air drop. These things don't work. And now it's really funny when you go to Telegram, let's say some of the channels of the ICOs or STOs, and you see, let's say 10K, 20K users there, and most of them are there just to get free tokens, which might, I know, rise a bit in value, and they're not the people who are actually gonna be investors. So answering your question, how do you communicate an STO? It's actually through personal brand, through company's brand, focusing more on thought leadership, focusing more on the conference, actually showing your credibility and your experience in the industry where you're at, rather than trying to hype.
My question is more, that's global now.
Yeah.
It's not localized, it's global. How do you get that across to various different communities? That must be a harder task to do, surely?
I wouldn't say you have to really focus on specific communities. Yes, you have basically the English-speaking market, and then you have like Chinese, Korean market, where you have to basically communicate with in their own language, but that's just one part. Basically, if you have really good product and you have a good value proposition, just communicate in English through, let's say, high authority websites, like for example Forbes, like Financial Times, through big conferences, international ones, like I don't know, Web Summit in Europe or whatever. You can communicate who you are and what are your values in terms of the business, and that will transmit to the potential investors. They will go to this conference, they will meet you, and most of them will speak English.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say you have to focus on specific countries in their own language.
Fab. Okay, so we're probably going to wrap it up there. Did we answer the question? Are ICOs dead? Long live STOs? Are we feeling that STOs are the way forward? Regulate. Okay, fab. Okay, I just want to open up for 2 minutes or so if there are any other questions anybody would like to ask the panel at all. Can't see any questions. Anybody? No? Nobody's got one single question, not one. There must be one question. I'm not leaving until we get one question. No, there is no question. Right, okay, we're leaving then in that case. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us. Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Laura. Thank you very much.